Charlie. Thank you. My name is Charlie Carter. I'm the chair of the committee. And before we get started, I'm going to recognize our new secretary of DEQ, Mary Penny Kelly, for a few remarks.
So, hi. Okay, great. It's on. I didn't see a button, you know. And I sat up there for some kind of staff meeting. There's a button to like mute all, but apparently it does nothing. So I figure it's just like, you know, like kind of a comfort animal right there.
No,
just like, I want it to stop. But thank you for having me here. I wanted to come by and just pop in and say hi. I know I missed your first meeting when I had taken this job because it was the day that I started. So I wanted to make sure I came by now. And in between then and now, there's been a hurricane, so a lot of stuff. And I will speak a little bit more directly to Hurricane Helene tomorrow, but did want to just stop in at the committees and say hi. Thank you for your work that you're doing here. I know our staff spends a lot of time pulling together relevant information to put before you so you can balance those competing interests between business interests, environmental interests, and resident interests. So thank you so much, and just wanted to say hi. I'll be around in and out. I hate that they blocked off the closet sometimes, but that used to be the place to get all the deals done, right? So it's good to be back, and thank you for all your day here and tomorrow, the time you put towards helping our environment and our state. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much, and please, you're welcome anytime. Moving on to the agenda is an initial matter, of course. The General Statute 138A-15 requires me to inquire as to whether any member knows of any known or conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters before the committee today. If any member knows of such a conflict or appearance, please so state at this time. Okay. Hearing nothing, I will take that as everyone is satisfied or okay on that. Second matter is approval of the minutes from the meeting in September. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Any questions about them? Any corrections, changes? If not, I would take a motion to approve the minutes.
I so move.
That's Commissioner Bailey.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Ellison. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And they're approved unanimously. Now, let's move on to the first matter on the substantive part of the agenda. That's concept for revisions of the rule for air curtain incinerators. And Anna Delahunt? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you behind. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Anna Delahunt with the planning section of the Division of Air Quality, and today my presentation is on revisions to 15A NCAC 02D 1904, the rule on air curtain incinerators. So here are some acronyms that we'll be using throughout the presentation, just for you to reference. So some background on the rule. The provisions in 15A NCAC 02D 1900 are the open burning rule, and it prohibits open burning except for as described in 1903 and 1904. Rule 02D 1904 sets the conditions for the operation of air curtain incinerators, or ACIs, including applicability, permitting, opacity limitations, and visible emissions, performance tests, and record-keeping requirements. The existing rule that we have is currently in place right now requires Title V permits for all ACIs. So the rule was originally adopted and became effective on July 1st, 1996, and has set the requirements for air curtain burners. It required permits for air curtain burners that are at permanent sites and those that had materials transported in from other sites. Burners that had the potential to burn 1,500 tons of material or more per year were subject to Section 15A NCAC 02Q 0500 Title V procedures. The rule also had requirements for opacity, visible emission certification, ash accumulation, and maintaining daily logs of different burn materials. In December of 2000, the EPA finalized new source performance standards, NSPS, and emission guidelines, EGs, for commercial and industrial solid waste incineration, SISWI units, under 40 CFR Part 60, subparts Quad C and Quad D, respectively. In December of 2005, the EPA finalized NSPS and EGs for other solid waste incineration, OSWI units, under 40 CFR Part 60, subparts Quad E and Quad F, respectively. So there are regulations for both SISWI and OSWI units. The difference between SISWI units is that SISWI units have a daily throughput of greater than or equal to 35 tons per day, while OSWI ACIs have a daily throughput of less than 35 tons per day. Amendments to O2D 1904 were effective on August 4, 2004, and they required that there was a certified visible emissions reader on site at all times while ACIs were operating. It changed the opacity standards and incorporated federal rules for SISWI ACIs. It also lowered the 1,500 tons per year trigger to have a Title V permit to 8,100 tons per year. And then amendments effective on July 1st, 2007, incorporated the OSWI standards and record-keeping requirements of the EPA's final rules for OSWI ACIs. So Rule O2D 1904 was readopted on September 1st, 2019 to include changes by the EPA for SISWI and OSWI ACIs. So some of these changes were to add or refine definitions of wood waste, clean lumber, and yard waste, to revise requirements so all new or existing ACIs must have a general Title V operating permit, and to add some timeline to this permitting process, and to amend some opacity limits. On April 17, 2024, the EPA finalized the elimination of a Title V permit requirement for OSWI ACIs that burn less than 35 tons per day of only wood waste, clean lumber, yard waste, or a mixture of these materials. So these changes were made to 40 CFR Part 60, subparts Quad E and Quad F. And also last week, the EPA proposed some technical corrections to these rules, and we're still evaluating the impacts of that. The ACIs must not be located at Title V major sources or otherwise subject to Title V permit requirements, and they must continue to comply with opacity limitations. On October 24th of 2024, the DAQ requested regulatory relief from the EPA regarding the use of ACIs in North Carolina to handle disaster debris, including waiver of the Title V permanent requirement for SISWI ACIs. So this rule is about OSWI ACIs, but they requested regulatory relief in regards to SISWI ACIs. We received a partial response on November 6th, but have received no waiver at this time.
What was the nature of that partial response then?
I'm not sure of the exact details of what the response was, but it did not grant the waiver.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to address that in a broader Hurricane Helene response efforts during my remarks at the end of the meeting, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
On October 10th, 2024, the General Assembly of North Carolina passed House Bill 149, otherwise known as the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024, in response to Hurricane Helene. Section 10.5C of the Act stated that owners and operators of permanent and temporary ACIs subject to 40 CFR Part 60, subparts Quad E and Quad F, shall not be required to obtain a General Title V operating permit, and this would apply to ACIs that burn less than 35 tons per day of only wood waste, clean lumber, yard waste, or a mixture of these materials. So this went ahead and enacted the end goal of what rulemaking we're working on right now. Section 10.5D required the EMC to amend ACI Rule O2D 1904 to be consistent with Section 10.5C. And this change will be in effect until the revised permanent rule is effective and this rulemaking is done. So the DAQ intends to propose removing the Title V permit requirement for OSWI ACIs that burn only wood waste, clean lumber, and yard waste, or a mixture of these materials, in 15A NCAC O2D 1904. To align with EPA's recent revisions to 40 CFR Part 60, subparts Quad E and Quad F. The DAQ is also proposing some changes based on comments from the regional offices and DAQ staff. Until EPA action is taken to remove or waive the Title V permit requirement for SISWI ACIs, such provisions will remain in Rule O2D 1904. So currently, the DAQ is evaluating the current DAQ practices and the state and federal rules. And our next steps will be to finalize the scope of the rulemaking and to draft the rules and the fiscal note and regulatory impact analysis. So here's where we are now, and we hope to present draft rules to AQC in January, go to the EMC in March 2025, go to public comment in the spring or summer of 2025 and have it adopted by the EMC in July or September. So one more thing to note that is a little outside the ordinary is the effective date. So pursuant to Section 10.5D of the Disaster Recovery Act, rules adopted pursuant to this section are not subject to Part 3 of Article 2A of Chapter 150B of the General Statutes, meaning Rules Review Commission review, and shall become effective as provided in General Statute 150B 21.3B1, as though 10 or more written objections have been received as provided in General Statute 150B 21.3B2. So this means the rule will go to the next legislative session for review by the General Assembly. And pursuant to General Statute 150B 21.3B1, rules that go before the General Assembly will become effective on the earlier of the 31st legislative day or the day of adjournment of the next regular session of the General Assembly that begins at least 25 days after the date of the Rules Review Commission reviewed that rule, unless a different effective date applies. Since it's not going to the Rules Review Commission, it'll either be at the 31st legislative day or if a different effective date is set in place. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? None? All right. Well, thank you very much. I had it up and I so that's not right. Sorry. The next thing on our listed are the EMC agenda items for tomorrow. Is there anything we want to do with those at all? Does anybody on the committee have any questions or anything? We acted on these in September, and I think everyone was good with where we're headed on those. But if there's anything, questions, anybody wants to hear anything about them? Nope. All right. Then let's move on to the update on the pre-permitting activities provisions of Session Law 2023-134. I'll get my thing back up there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. So this informational item provides an update on revisions to permitting rules to incorporate pre-permitting activity provisions of Session Law 2023-134, Section 12.11E, as amended by Session Law 2024-1. This item was presented as a rulemaking concept at the July AQC meeting. As a reminder, a component of the session law provision included an addition to the list of activities that were allowed prior to obtaining a permit from the division. The new provision would allow construction but not operation of a new air contaminant source or associated control device, so long as the applicant submitted an administratively complete application to the division. This allowance for construction included several exceptions, and those are noted in our slides from the July meeting. As noted in our July 2024 presentation, Session Law 2024-1 revised the effective date of the subject provision, delaying the effective date. Specifically, it required the division to prepare and submit to the US EPA for approval a state implementation plan or SIP amendment based on changes to the air permitting program in Section 12.11 of Session Law 2023-134 by July 1 of 2025. Then the provision would become effective on the first day of the month. That's 60 days after the DEQ secretary certifies to the reviser of statutes that EPA has approved an amendment to our SIP. Questions were raised during the July 2024 AQC meeting. In our responses to those questions to committee members, we committed to get EPA's comments on this concept prior to moving forward with the entire rulemaking process. So on September 10th, 2024, and consistent with Session Law 2024-1 requirements, DEQ requested that EPA propose approval of the proposed SIP revision via parallel processing, or in the alternative, provide an explanation as to why they could not propose approval of those amendments. That request letter is attached to the agenda materials here today. That's the September 10th, 2024 request from the division. On September 30th, 2024, EPA responded, indicating that they are not proceeding to request to the request to propose approval because of the complex nature of these changes and the concerns outlined in their comments. And that response letter is also posted to the agenda materials provided here today. So, Mr. Chairman, the short summary is the division has fulfilled its obligations under Session Law 2024-1 by submitting a SIP amendment request to EPA, and EPA responded. And with that, no further action is necessary on this particular item. That concludes my update on this particular item, but I'll be glad to take any questions that you or the committee members have.
Okay, I'm trying to understand exactly where we are procedurally. I know this request was for parallel processing, which they've declined to do. So have we actually submitted anything to them for review and approval at this point?
Yes, sir. That was the aforementioned September 10th, 2024 letter and attached pre-draft rules on this matter.
Well, yeah, but those are pre-draft rules. That's really my point. So where do we stand in our rulemaking process?
We presented a concept at the July meeting.
Right.
And committed to get these responses to the questions during that meeting and get an indication from EPA where we would be. We discovered that the parallel processing request would be the most expeditious route to get those answers and help us define our path forward on this item.
Right, but I mean, it's, at least for us, is there any, it sounds like the next thing to do is bring forward the rule and take it to the commission. Am I missing something here?
Well, again, the legislation requires us to submit a SIP request to amend the SIP
Right.
to EPA. We did so, and we received the response indicating that there were concerns and that they would not be able to move forward with that request. So it brings back to the committee, is it, and that was the question that was posed to us in July was, is it worth going through this entire rulemaking process if EPA there was potentially going to be a problem once we submitted it to EPA? Should we go through that entire process or not?
Well, I guess I'm concerned about, we've got a legislative mandate here. I don't disagree that we've, I guess, fulfilled it in that we've at least asked for EPA's advice, but we've still got a statutory change that it looks like to me we have an obligation to implement. And I'm not real clear why we wouldn't go forward with a rule in the normal process, send it to the commission, and then send it to EPA. And if EPA wants to disapprove it, then they can disapprove it in a formal manner. But that letter is not a disapproval of a SIP provision because we haven't submitted a SIP provision. We've submitted a pre-draft, as I understand it, and they've given us an internal decision from a branch chief. That's far from the normal disapproval process.
I understand, but I will also share that we know that the EPA staff and legal team did review this as a normal track parallel processing submittal.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Commissioner Ellison.
are the EPA's objections issues that the department can overcome in a response or in advancing the rule and crafting language in the rule?
Thank you for the question. I don't believe so. I think the concerns raised by EPA are very much aligned with the concerns raised by the division and our legal review of the provision that was in Session Law 2023-134.
Okay, thank you.
That's Commissioner Bailey.
I don't have the legislation in front of me. I was just curious. So it sounds like do you feel like we've met the legislative mandate by merely submitting it, or does the legislation require that we go through the rulemaking process?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. The former, I believe we've met the legislative mandate.
which means you don't believe the rulemaking process is required as long as you've submitted it and EPA has replied yea or nay.
Yes, ma'am. That was what we attempted to do following the July meeting and the nature of some of the questions and our responses to those at the July meeting of this committee.
Thank you.
Question.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, just procedural, big picture. Has DEQ talked to the bill sponsors to see if this is sufficient? What you're telling us, there was a bill that was sponsored. That's all they wanted. Have y'all talked to General Assembly? Because they'll roll back in here in January. If it's not what they want, we're gonna say, well, we did the thing, and they're gonna do something else, and we're gonna be back in this boat. Have y'all talked to bill sponsors or anything?
Thank you for the question. No, sir, we have not.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
But
it sounds like this is mostly a timing issue, as I understand it, from Mr. Abrazinskis, that the intent of the legislation was to get some response from EPA on whether these were approvable changes to the SIP before moving forward with rulemaking. So it's not an issue of refusing to do rulemaking. It's an issue of waiting until we have an EPA response, a substantive response to the SIP changes. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. And yes, and so I'll also note, 2023-134 became law. And when it became law, it was in effect, which triggered the rulemaking process, which we brought forward and started in July. 2024-1 changed that effective date from it being effective to somewhat of a conditional and delayed effective date of the provision, provided that the state submitted a SIP revision to EPA, and it's then reviewed and approved, and then it would become effective upon all the steps that I mentioned earlier, the secretary advising the revise their statutes, et cetera, 60 days afterwards, and all affected parties. So that was the change between 2023 and 2024. So that there was an intentional change there to put in a step to do what we've done.
So, Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up. So it sounds like the legislation, the mandate under the legislation is not actually in effect at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's my understanding. Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Ellison?
you stated a minute ago that you felt like you had met the legislative mandate. Is that your opinion, or has the department counsel weighed in on this?
Yes, and we've had some discussions internally on that, but we can certainly look at that particular provision if you'd like.
I just want to make sure
yeah.
that, you think we're done, and that's probably very reasonable, but from a legal perspective, it might help to confirm that.
Sure. I'll be glad to circle back with all of our legal team in additional time, if that would be helpful.
Just trying to make sure we got it covered.
Yes, sir. Me too.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison. I think that's probably a useful exercise, and I guess I don't know if there's anything more to do today, but sounds like we need to have that further discussion, I guess, in January now. What I am concerned about this process, at least, as I indicated, and whether or not we ought to seriously consider pushing ahead, even if we know that EPA is at least skeptical, if not opposing it at this point. But I don't want to push that right now. We need to find out more about that part of the situation. And quite frankly, the other part of this is, of course, there are going to be changes at EPA coming up in the next few months, new administrator and senior staff. So I don't know whether that'll affect any of this or not. It might. It may not. Things may not change at all. So I think we're in a bit of flux on both sides of this. So if you're agreeable, Mr. Chair, then we'll defer doing anything further on this until January?
Yeah, I think from Michael, the request is that you guys look at this legally or however else you need to look at it.
Mhm.
My concern is what I just stated. I don't want people to roll back in here and get in an argument about whether we have given them what they want or they expect, I should say. I don't know what they want, but what they expect or what they can legally give us,
Mhm.
require of us. So
Mhm.
just trying to set up as Commissioner Ellis said, a conflict that we can avoid here. We do the legal research, so to speak, to clarify that. Thank
Very
you.
good.
All right, I guess that takes care of all the pre-permitting activities. Or do you have something else on that?
Nothing else on that. Thank you very much. I think we understand next steps.
Okay. And I know you said you had some further remarks, particularly, including the question I raised earlier about the EPA response on the air curtain incinerators.
Yes, sir. So number of updates and remarks this morning. So I'll start with a quick update on our exceptional events demonstration. You've heard us mention that several times related to our PM 2.5 designations process. We expect to release that exceptional events demonstration for a 30-day comment period in the coming week or so. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be providing a summary presentation to the committee at an upcoming meeting. Our division remains very engaged on the Hurricane Helene response activities, doing so with a heavy heart, for those that have suffered losses in Western North Carolina. Our team in the Division of Air Quality spent a lot of time supporting federal, state, and local entities, their contractors, individual citizens with technical assistance related to managing disaster debris. We are part of a team that is leading those statewide efforts. Much of our involvement, led by Deputy Director Taylor Hartsfield, focuses on helping folks make mistakes in managing this debris. Mistakes that could potentially make them ineligible for FEMA reimbursement later. We've also developed 3 guidance documents and put them on our website and are disseminating them to all parties that will assist in this matter. As part of that effort, we're providing technical assistance to local governments that are wanting to use air curtain incinerators for management of vegetative debris, yard waste, and clean lumber. We're helping them navigate these pretty complicated federal regulations that apply to certain types of air curtain incinerators. We've discovered along the way that some of the provisions in some of those federal regulations don't make a lot of sense for this particular situation or a situation like this one. So we sent a letter to EPA on October 24th requesting some conditioned relief for particular permitting provisions and notification requirements and throughput limitations that we believe are somewhat complicating our response to this unprecedented disaster. EPA responded to that request on November 6th, including a notification that the EPA administrator had just signed a technical corrections notice on November 4th, addressing one of our particular concerns. And we're very appreciative of EPA's response to these concerns. That particular response did address allowing temporary disaster debris burning in new OSWE units or new OSWE ACIs without a Title V permit. So again, some of the item you heard earlier is related to Title V permitting requirements being taken away for certain OSWE units. This one would allow temporary disaster debris burning for new OSWE units that fall under the new source performance standards. And that we feel like that was a very appropriate and needed correction that was made by EPA. So we were very appreciative of that. Our division continues to work with EPA on some of the remaining issues related to temporary use disaster debris ACIs that process more than 35 tons per day. Those are the CISWE units that Anna mentioned earlier. And so we will continue to work on that with EPA. I think we've identified a pathway and we'll give you updates at a future meeting on that. But I think we will be able to get some of that additional relief for those units. Some of our motivations here for asking for this type of relief, first, there's just a tremendous amount of disaster debris to manage. Debris separation, best practices, beneficial reuse, are all being suggested and encouraged by our entire DEQ team involved. Burning, however, is going to be part of the portfolio of processing certain types of disaster debris, such as vegetative debris and yard waste and clean lumber. Use of air curtain incinerators in those cases is being encouraged by our division as opposed to open burning, very much so. The use of ACIs as opposed to open burning produce less fine particle pollution, and it's a safer alternative in the terrain in the mountains where there can be some significant wildfire concerns, especially since it's been so dry since the storm. So that use of the ACIs reduces that risk. All of this aligns and coincides with our efforts to implement EPA's new PM 2.5 standard. We want the lowest particle pollution scenario for managing this disaster debris. Additionally, we want our local governments to be on the best possible footing and in the best possible position for FEMA reimbursements. And we do not want non-compliance with a federal ACI regulation related to permits or notifications to be the trip string that impacts their FEMA reimbursement. We are most certainly going to follow up and track all of these units, and all of the other requirements will still apply. So other activities that we're involved in, our division provided provisions.
Hang on just a second. Mr. Chair, you have a
Yes, sir.
question about
I have
that?
a question. It's probably going to come up tomorrow, and I just want to cut it down today. You say you strongly encourage the curtains for debris and waste and what? Tell us more about what that means. I mean, somebody comes in and says, I'm going to start burning, and you say, we encourage a curtain, and they say, no, not going to do it. What happens now? Did they wait 2 months for you to make some decision or send them a letter, or do they just do it and you say no harm, no foul, we just encouraging it? What does encourage mean? Because government encouraging something, I hear 6 months
Yeah.
of spinning here. So tell us about process.
Well, we certainly are, do not want to be an impediment or get in the way of the recovery efforts in Western North Carolina. We're helping folks navigate their options. And they have each of these options, right? They can legally do open burning if certain conditions are met and if certain components are not in there, like synthetic debris. But air curtain incinerators are also an option for, local governments that are managing large collection efforts. And so if they are interested in that, we're going to help them navigate these regulations, help get something that's sited properly, that has the least impact to citizens nearby. And so, yeah, and I think we're just at that tipping point where those decisions are now being made, and Deputy Director Hartsfield shaking her head, yes, that, we don't have a long list of these that are already requested and cited and in place and operating, but we anticipate that that's going to evolve over time. And so we're just making sure that everyone's in the best possible position, has great information, they know where to go to get good information and answers. But yeah, there's not going to be a prolonged, protracted process for this. We are going to take them by the hand and lead them through the process.
I assume it'd be fair to say you're going to encourage the use of air curtain incinerators.
We
But
most
not-
certainly are.
But not demand it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Bailey.
Well, just how much open burning is being done right now as they're gathering everything up? And have you had violations, or aren't you even looking at violations? So just what's going on now with open burning, and how are you managing it?
That's a great question, Commissioner Bailey, and I'm sure after the first couple of days, there's been open burning occurring, whether it's a citizen in their backyard or larger efforts. We've not investigated or and identified any particular issue since the storm occurred. But we're certainly going to be using our discretion in this situation. And one additional thing that we assisted with was providing some conditioned relief to the open burning rules in the state's first disaster recovery bill. And so those provisions still require the setbacks and time of day restrictions, et cetera. that exist in the rules, but we've not run into any particular situations yet, but we'd be naive to say that it's not occurring. And I'll talk a little bit about some monitoring that we're doing as well to complement all of this to make sure that these types of activities are not causing issues in our mountains. So I'll touch on that in just a moment.
Just a follow-up question. So, I mean, I know FEMA's out there, there's different kinds of emergency people out there. So is the division working with them to, when you're gathering all this stuff up and putting it in big piles, is that how, I'm just sort of wondering about on the ground, how can it be managed? And sure, I can see where individuals at their own homes
Yep.
might do some open burning to get stuff out of the way, but there's a lot of other stuff that I know is getting piled up in places. And so how is your staff working
Yep.
with like the bigger operations?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I will defer that question to Deputy Director Hartsfield, and also note as she's coming up to the podium that, you know, our colleagues at the Division of Waste Management are a huge part of that. So it may be a question better posed to Director Scott a little later today and some of his folks. So Taylor?
Yeah, so just to touch on some of the points about coordinating with FEMA, I'm on calls every week, every Tuesday and Thursday. They were daily calls. We finally kind of pulled them back down a little bit, but they were daily calls every day, even on weekends, with FEMA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, other contractors that were being considered, and local partners as well on the ground. So both the Department of Waste Management, solid waste section staff, and myself were involved. Right now, the primary focus has been getting debris out of right-of-ways and out of waterways. They haven't really gotten to the full debris management phase of whether or not we're going to chip material, put it in landfill. It's more like kind of sorting and then deciding what's the best management practice. But we're starting to have those conversations now. As far as disaster debris sites, I'm not aware of any open burning that's going on at those locations, but we have been contacted about future siting of ACIs at those locations. So we've provided like a one-page guidance document that's specific to citing ACIs at disaster debris sites. We also have a specific guidance document for open burning at disaster debris sites. And then we have another guidance document for open burning at residences. And we do know that open burning at residences is certainly occurring, but we just haven't gotten any confirmation of any disaster debris site doing open burning. And we've heard primarily they want to look at other options as far as chipping, maybe using that as firewood, other options. However, you know, there is concern about the landfill space up in certain areas of the western part of North Carolina. But we do know right now that there is an ACI located at Buncombe County landfill. And I've been working and partnering with them and talking to them about siting criteria and making sure they're in compliance with the rules today. So.
Commissioner Ellison.
I was up there about a month ago,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of open burning going on.
Mhm.
I'd suggest that your guidelines, however well-intentioned, are probably not going to carry a lot of weight with the locals, because they're just dealing with it as they can.
Mhm.
At the time we were up there, everyone was told to just pile your stuff up on the side of the road and FEMA will come by and pick it up later. A lot of people didn't have much faith in that. And a lot of the burning is necessary when mudslides brought a lot of debris down, and they cleared a spot, a relatively flat spot on the side of the hill, on the side of the road, and they just dragged a lot of stuff up there and burned it because they got to get it out of the way. And it's also, in a year, a forest fire hazard. If you get a forest fire up there and you've got a big old brush pile of hurricane debris that's been sitting there drying out, it's going to make that fire a lot hotter and potentially a lot more dangerous. So there is a lot of burning going on, whether it's in somebody, you know, burning stuff on their own property or just the locals trying to clear the road, piling it up. And it was everywhere. You drive up and down those roads and you pass a lot of that burning.
So I mentioned monitoring. So quick update on that component to this, because that's an important piece. And thank you, Taylor. So on the monitoring front, just want to highlight one of the things we did before the storm. We took actions to protect our monitoring assets by shutting down monitors at our high elevation sites that were going to be getting the greatest exposure to wind. I'm very glad that we did, because several of our sites experienced 100-mile-an-hour gusts. We did not lose any equipment. I'm very happy to report, and all monitors that should be running are back up and running. But complementary to those, all of the prior activities I mentioned, we are proactively addressing concerns about the significant amount of burning of vegetative or woody disaster debris through the fall and winter season, which happens to be the time of year when temperature inversions can occur in our mountain valleys, locking air pollution in place. And so we are deploying a number of non-regulatory monitors for fine particle pollution in strategic locations where we don't have any monitoring sites currently. Some of those include at our Asheville Regional Office near Swannanoa, Fairview, which is in southeastern Buncombe County, Lenoir, Boone, and Hendersonville. Additionally, through EPA Region 4's sensor loan program, we have borrowed and are deploying 11 air quality sensors, particulate sensors, that we're deploying in other locations throughout Western North Carolina. Most of those have been sited, and staff are out siting the last couple of those this week. These additional, what I'll call indicator data from the sensors, are going to help us inform the public with supplementary real-time data that will be posted to EPA's fire and smoke map tool and help our air quality forecasters in areas void of data. Thus far, no unique issues have been identified at any of our regular monitors or any of these complementary non-regulatory monitors that we've put out in the field. But again, we think that's an important piece to our overall response, is having that additional data. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks for today. I'll be glad to take any additional questions.
Commissioner Ellison?
A question about the nature of the smoke from burning. When you burn dry wood, how different is that compared to what they're doing now, is burning relatively green wood, which takes a lot more diesel to get a good fire? What are the differences in that smoke?
Emissions are higher for wet wood than dry wood. Without doubt, you have the potential for greater amounts of smoke to be present as a nuisance. And so, yeah, I think some of the best practices are sorting and letting some of the material dry for some period of time. In fact, just prior to this storm, we were still working with local government along the Pigeon River, granting extensions to temporary disaster debris air curtain incinerator sites. This was related to the impacts of Tropical Storm Fred in 2021. And so we were still helping folks manage that dried disaster debris to go in an air curtain incinerator up until this storm came along. So, it will take some time, obviously, but I think the drier the material, the vegetative debris, the lower the emissions profile can be.
So, but so if you burn green wood, there's more smoke, right? So you're saying there's more emissions, but a lot of that is just the moisture. Is there something chemically in the emissions that's significantly different between green and dry?
Yeah, I'd have to defer to some of my staff on that particular question. I apologize. Thank you.
The other thing listed here is calendar and status of ongoing rule developments. Is there anything to report on there, or is?
The only thing I'll highlight, Mr. Chairman, is we're anticipating, it's not in ink, but anticipating possibly in January bringing back the rule set for GHG emissions from electric generating units. This is the 111D rule set that we presented a pretty lengthy concept on previously. That may be ready to come forward in January, but we'll keep you posted. If not January, possibly March.
Now that's to implement what? The GHG requirements? Is that the, well, go ahead.
Yes, sir. These are the GHG emission guidelines under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act that EPA put in place earlier this year. And so state plans are due May of 2026 under that program. And I think Ms. Quinlan gave a fairly lengthy presentation on that concept. Was it July? Yes, at our July meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, I do have one last comment, I guess, and then we'll close out. But I was just revisiting this EPA letter, and I'm certainly at least find questionable that they're citing to the PSD regs in here as a reason for not proceeding with this, because as they admit in the later on the letter, the rule specifically excludes PSD sources from the allowance to start construction. So I think there's some serious questions about this letter, and we need that legal review and look much more closely at this, because I think it looks like to me EPA is playing kind of fast and loose with their regs here in their objection to what we put forward. In any event, can't settle that today, of course, but see what you can find out, and we'll deal with that in January. Anybody else have any questions, thoughts, anything you want to bring up while we have the director here? Oh, Commissioner Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. I really want to acknowledge Deputy Director Hartsfield and her coordination with her state and federal partners, and also all the efforts that you, Director Abrazinskas, have mentioned that the department is making to try to ease the burden on Western North Carolina and help those folks out. I know it is heartfelt, and I appreciate your work.
Okay, well, and I will make one last comment, a final comment, which is we're gonna investigate further this 8:45 start stuff and see if we can't figure that out and hopefully not repeat it in future. But thanks everyone for coming early.
Does that mean no one has confessed yet?
Not yet. I'm still trying to track it down. Actually, Director Abrazinskas was supposedly the source of it, and he's made it clear that he's not. So that's why I said we're going to have to investigate further. But thank you all, and this Air Quality Committee is recessed until January. Take care.